snap. The kick is in the air, and the kick this time is no, sir-ree. No, sir-ree. Final score, Tennessee 20, Florida 17. Pandemonium reigns.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by RockyTopInsider.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the RTI Podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, your managing editor at RockyTopInsider.com, joined again, as always, by our staff writer here at RTI, Ben McKee. He is also the producer and co-host of the Swain Event morning radio show. We appreciate you all tuning in for another episode here. And Ben and I didn't get to do a post-game show, a post-game podcast, or a post-game live show. Tried to do a live show, but never really could get it to work out where you could hear both Ben and I talking. We're going to try to get the Kings worked out because I would love to do one after the Florida game if possible. So we'll keep you updated on that and see if we can get that to work out. But in the meantime, Ben, we didn't get to talk about a whole lot of the UTC game, together. We did both the pieces and things like that on it. We didn't get to do an actual podcast or a live show. So we'll spend just the first 10, maybe 15 minutes here of this podcast doing that because we know, that wasn't exactly a big game. Tennessee beat up on an FCS school like they should have. So Tennessee got a big win. But Ben, as you wrote in your game story on Sunday about it, I mean, Tennessee, they didn't just get the win, but they checked a lot of the boxes they needed to check off. You got Jarrett Guarantano some more confidence back after a rough start to the season for him, which he said that after the game as well. He talked about how he has learned more about himself over the first 2 weeks of the season than he probably has in his entire playing career. You also got both backup quarterbacks into play the game, which that was also a must for me, and I think you also would agree it was pretty much a must to at least get one of them there, but getting both in was good. And you played a lot of young guys. I think just about all, if not all, of Tennessee's freshmen played, the healthy ones. I don't think they had anybody who's really been hurt. Well, I guess Chris Akprogane might have been the only one that maybe didn't see action because he's been hurt. But for the most part, you had almost all of your newcomers, even some of your second-year players see the field on Saturday and got some film on them so the coaches can actually see things with, not just the quarterbacks, but some of these other younger guys who haven't played a whole lot. Pruitt mentioned Tyus Field standing out to him a little bit. Got to see Jerry Banks make 2 interceptions. And Kenny Solomon picked off a pass late in the fourth quarter to preserve Tennessee's shutout. So, Ben, without going too deep into it, because it once again it was an FCS school and not a particularly great one. UTC is not one of the for context, they were not in the top 25 FCS poll that I saw that got released today. I don't think they're going to be. They'll probably finish maybe 4th in the SoCon this year. So they're not a great FCS school. It wasn't like you're playing North Dakota State or Towson, which Florida's going to play later on. But we'll get to some more Florida stuff in a second. But Ben, I do want to discuss briefly, the biggest positive and the biggest negative we both took away from the game. I'll go ahead and ask you first about let's go negative first because then we can get the negative out of the way and then finish with the positive before we get into Florida discussion. What was the one thing that, despite the 45-0 win, what was the one thing that you still came away with saying, that's not where it needed to be, they didn't show the right improvement there? What was the biggest negative from the game?
The defensive line and the corners. I did not think that they played particularly well considering the opponent. A lot of, Tennessee's damage up front was thanks to the linebacker play. I thought Tennessee's linebackers had a really nice game, especially on the edge at outside linebacker. Darrell Taylor, DeAndre Johnson, Kavaris Crouch, Roman Harrison, those guys. I thought those guys played really well and generated more pressure than the defensive line ever came close to doing. And as a result, I think people are going to assume that the defensive line played well, when in reality it was more so the outside linebackers that played well. And then obviously you had Henry To'o and Daniel Batuli making some plays there in the middle of the field. So I was disappointed in the defensive line considering the opponent. Statistically, everything looks okay. Well, I don't even know that I would say that. I think that too many rushing yards were given up to a team like UTC. I don't have the final number off the top of my head or right in front of me, but I know it's somewhere around 160, 150, 140 maybe, somewhere in there.
It was 153, I believe.
Yeah, that's way too much against an FCS opponent. Way too much against an FCS opponent. A team that's not even Division I should not run rush for that many yards. And I think it was because the defensive line failed to generate a push. I think it's because the defensive line failed to fill the correct gaps and stop the run. So I did not think the defensive line played well considering the opponent. If that was Florida, Florida's rushing for 200, 250 yards. And not just Florida, but honestly the rest of Tennessee's schedule. Apple Watch. Be quiet, Siri. Sorry. What's funny is my watch reads back to me, what is rushing for 200, 250 yards in? That's funny. But I did not like the defensive line. And then the corners, it's kind of the same thing. Statistically, it looks good. What 50 or so passing yards, giving up 70, somewhere in there.
Yeah, 76.
A pretty number. Yeah, pretty number if you look at the stat sheet. But I thought Tennessee's corners were bailed out quite a few times. I thought UTC's wide receivers were able to create separation. And if the quarterback doesn't, airmail some passes or underthrow them or just throws an accurate football, those are 10 to 12-yard gains that they did not take advantage of. And also, the wide receivers helped Tennessee out in the sense that they dropped a couple of passes that Florida is not dropping, Mississippi State, South Carolina, so on and so forth. So considering the opponent, I was not pleased with how the defensive line or the corners played against a legitimate opponent like Florida. This weekend, if they play the same way, they're going to get beat 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, you know what? I would agree with you. And as a side note, I'm not going to edit out that part with your Siri. That was too funny. I'm gonna leave it in the podcast here. But I think both of my biggest concerns, or I guess I can combine it just defensively in general. I think I'd agree with you. I think my biggest concerns were the defensive line not really doing anything. I mean, outside of, you mentioned Darrell Middleton getting. If you mentioned it earlier, I know you mentioned a Swain show for sure. But Darrell Middleton got a quarterback pressure. That was kind of the only big thing you could point to from the defensive line. I mean, Matthew Butler played okay. He ended up with 4 tackles, but for the most part on Saturday, Ben, I mean, we weren't talking about defensive linemen. The big names on defense you were hearing making tackles for loss, making disruptive plays, were the linebackers. I mean, obviously you had Nigel Warrior made an interception, which was very good to see. That's a big positive for sure, because we all, you and I, Swain, everyone who's covered Tennessee has been, talking about Nigel Warrior not, playing like a safety, not really making an impact in the back of the secondary like he's supposed to. And it was good to see him get an interception and almost return for a touchdown. If he'd kept his foot in bounds, he would have been, gone and returned that for his second score of his career. But he didn't. But anyway, the linebackers, I think, were the biggest positive from Tennessee's defense for sure. Defensive line didn't do much of anything. Granted, the 151 rushing yards, it's inflated just a little bit because UTC did run the ball 44 times. That was only a 3.4 yard per carry average. But you look at their starting running back, whose name I cannot pronounce and will not try to. He had 85 yards on 15 carries, which is just under 6 yards per carry. And granted, a lot of that came on a 37-yard rush. But still, you also had Alium Ford, who had 41 carries on 41 yards on 15 carries. I mean, that's not super efficient, but it was still more than, like you said, Ben, it's more than what an FCS school should have run against Tennessee. And part of that's on the linebackers, but most of that's on the defensive line, because they're the first line of defense, and they're the one that's supposed to be, getting penetration, making sure those holes aren't there, and they just didn't do it. You also didn't have any sacks, and like we said earlier, you only had 1 quarterback pressure from any of the defensive linemen. Same thing, though, on the back end of defense. Like you said, the stats are going to show that Tennessee secondary had a really good day. You didn't even let up 100 passing yards. You had 2 defensive backs pick off passes. But if this had been a better team, if this had been, if this had even been Georgia State, they're better than UTC. I think Tennessee's secondary would have had a much worse day. I don't think you would have seen like a 250 or 300 yard passer by any means, but Tennessee got bailed out several times by the fact that UTC's receivers dropped passes. I mean, there were a couple times where the UTC receiver, whoever it was, multiple guys, beat their man, whether it was Warren Burrell, whether it was Alontae Taylor, whether it was Kenneth George Jr. It doesn't matter who was covering them. If it was a cornerback, they beat them several times. They just dropped passes. There were a couple of times where it was linebacker covering them, and they dropped it, or it was a bad pass or whatever. But I don't know how many drops UTC's receivers had, or their pass catchers had, and there also were a few different times where Nick Keanu, or then also later on Arnold came in for I think it was Arnold, who was a backup quarterback, came in for UTC, and he wasn't super efficient either. But both those guys just misfired on a lot of passes too. Tiana finished 4 of 16, 40 yards and 2 picks. Not great, but a lot of that, like we said, it was drops and also misfires. It wasn't like Tennessee was getting pressure and making him, rattling him or anything like that. I think a great piece that everyone who's listening, if you're not already subscribed to The Athletic, I absolutely 100% think you should be subscribed to The Athletic. But if you need proof of it, go use your free trial and read the piece that David Ubben just did, where he got to spend the entire week essentially with UTC's coaching staff, and where they were talking about studying Tennessee's tendencies on film and everything, and they mentioned specifically one part I'm thinking of was that Tennessee tended, I think, almost every single second down, didn't matter the distance, didn't matter the situation, on just about every single second down play, they would send a blitz, whether it was a corner or a defensive back or a linebacker. They were almost always going to blitz on second down, so they get into the game plan UTC did, thinking on second down they're going to try to get the ball released very quickly. And they did for the most part. And then they also mentioned that, Pruitt and the staff didn't blitz as much on second down as they were anticipating. But even with that game plan, with Nick Tiano having the short passes, so Tennessee maybe isn't going to get as much pressure, they still should have gotten a sack in this game. I mean, I get the schematics and stuff like that, but I was disappointed with the secondary and defensive line. Against UTC, it obviously didn't cost Tennessee anything. They didn't give them any points either, period. I mean, it's not going to cost you against a team like UTC. But when you're playing teams like Florida and Georgia and Missouri and Kentucky, that's when it's going to cost you a lot more, when you're having guys who are still having issues with coverages. And I'll be interested to see, Ben, I think that's a topic of conversation maybe later in this podcast, maybe in a second one this week, but talking about Bryce Thompson, whether or not he will return. But before we get into some more stuff, just kind of finishing up a little bit here with some UTC talk. Biggest positives, Ben, I think my biggest positive, there's a lot to choose from, really. You could probably go special teams, honestly, because, aside from that kickoff out of bounds that Paxton Brooks had, that was the only miscue I thought the special teams had, because otherwise, they were almost immaculate. Aside from that, you had another field goal attempt that was good. Brent Maglia was 8 of 8 on the year. You had a blocked punt that was returned for a touchdown. You had almost another blocked punt. Ty Chandler ripped off a 58-yard return where it looked like maybe he was going to be able to score that one, but it did set up Tennessee's offense with really good field position. Both punts that Paxton Brooks and Joe Doyle did, those are both boomed for 50-plus yards. The one time that UTC was able to return a punt, he was stopped after advancing the ball 2 yards. So aside from that kickoff, everything that Tennessee did on special teams was perfect. That was honestly probably my biggest takeaway was that one. But I think my biggest positive, aside from special teams, was not only did you get to play all these young guys, not even just talking about the quarterbacks, but looking on defense, looking on the offensive line. Not only did you get to play them, but a lot of them flashed some potential. And like I said, I know this is UTC. You expect them, if they're going to flash something early on, it's going to be against a team like UTC, a clearly inferior opponent. But I really liked what I saw from, Jeremy Banks didn't have a great day as far as lining up and being in the correct gaps and things like that as an actual linebacker. But man, his 2 picks, one of them was easier, but one of the other ones he made was a really good heads up call or heads up play. Quavaris Crouch, I thought, made some good plays as well. Roman Harrison made some good plays. There were a lot of young guys on defense, and then you saw an offense with Wanya Morris and Darnell Wright and K'Ron Calvert, who he's not a freshman or anything like that, but he hasn't played in his entire Tennessee career until now. Those 3 guys all started, and all of them I thought had pretty good games, and I thought maybe Tennessee has found their 6 or 7 guys on the offensive line that they should be able to move forward with. I think just kind of offensively in general was my biggest positive besides special teams, but I will say probably the fact that you got to play so many young guys and so many of them kind of flash some potential makes you think, hey, maybe a little slim pickings this year because all these guys are really young, but there's a good core for the future for this team. And if Tennessee can go out and keep improving this year, they should be able to add quite a few more pieces like that in this 2020 class and be able to, build off what they already have as a pretty strong core of young guys here.
Yeah, I think to me the most encouraging sign was that Jared Garantano picked up some confidence in the win. He was 7 of 8, 100 yards and change, career high 3 touchdowns, and aside from that first throw to Marquez Callaway, in which he just simply underthrew Callaway, he had a really good day throwing the football. He got the ball out quick. He did not stare down receivers as he did against BYU and Georgia State. He made good pre-snap reads. And most importantly, as I mentioned, he got rid of the ball. He saw the open receivers. A lot of people were kind of giving him crap for, quote, being late to Cedric Tillman in the end zone on Cedric Tillman's touchdown. And he wasn't late. He made a good throw, made a great decision, saw the guy open. And the reason it appeared late was because it was play action. But as soon as he came out of the play action motion, he set his feet and he fired. It was a great decision, great recognition to see Tillman streaking open down the seam, and he threw a beautiful pass to Tillman in the end zone for a touchdown. So I thought JG looked really good. Yes, there's an asterisk next to it. It was against UTC, but at this point, with the way he played the first 2 weeks and the way he looked beat down, after the BYU game, that was good for him going into Florida, because we saw why Brian Maurer and JT Shrout aren't being considered to start. JG is by far away Tennessee's best option at quarterback right now. Folks may not like it, but it's the truth. And it's Garantano's roller coaster. He's going to ride it, all the highs, all the lows. And unless he gets hurt or unless he just completely falls off a cliff, Brian Maurer and JT Shrout aren't going to see the playing field. So going into Florida, a big rivalry game on the road, I thought it was great that Tennessee could build some confidence in JG, because if they are going to upset Florida, they're going to need the JG that played against Auburn, Kentucky, and South Carolina last year. That is the JG that is going to show up, and he looked more like that JG on Saturday against UTC. So, again, there's an asterisk next to it, sure, level of competition, but just to see him go out and do the basics was great. And as Swain has said multiple times, it's kind of like in basketball. As a shooter, when you're in a shooting slump, you just need to see the ball go through the rim, go through the net, and just you need to see them go in regardless of the competition. So I thought Saturday was good for him. And then also, Shrout didn't have a great job or a great day throwing the football. Maurer was 0-3, did pick up his first career rushing touchdown, but it was good for them to get in and get some snaps, because history tells us that JG is going to miss some time at some point due to injury. So at some point, I think Brian Maurer is the backup, just based off watching the guys play over the weekend. I think Maurer is the number 2 quarterback, even if Pruitt doesn't want to come out and say it. At some point, Maurer is going to have to go in. Hopefully it's after the Alabama game. Hopefully it's against the Kentuckys, the Missouris, and those teams. But at some point he's going to go in. And who knows, maybe it's Shrout. Pruitt did say that they went with Maurer first because there were some more run design plays for Maurer, and that's what they wanted to run. So in terms of throwing the football, it kind of seemed like he had more confidence in Shrout. So maybe we see Shrout. But it was good to get those guys some live game reps. And you mentioned the offensive line. That was critical. It seems like they've settled on a starting 5. I think Jameer Johnson will still play a lot going forward. I think he's your 6th offensive lineman. I think he'll still rotate in a good bit. But a lot of positives. Special teams was great. I would put Tennessee's specialists up there with anybody in the country. Brett Magley's 8 for 8. You had 2 punters punt the ball that went over 50 yards, and Paxton Brooks' punt went 59 yards. And it doesn't matter who you're playing. 59 yards, that's going to play against UTC. That's also going to play against Alabama, and that is completely flipping the field. That will be important this weekend against Florida. And then even on kickoffs, Paxton Brooks had the one kickoff that sailed out of bounds. I believe it was his 2nd kickoff of the game. But other than that particular kickoff, each and every kickoff this season from Paxton Brooks has been for a touchdown. So that's also more important than you realize. And then you also have guys buying in on special teams. And it sounds simple, but it's not as easy at places like Tennessee when you have guys coming from high school who are used to being the guy in high school, and they think it damages your ego to be playing special teams. But when you have guys like Tyler Bird and Brandon Johnson, seniors who just want to contribute to Tennessee winning, they're going to block punts and scoop it up and score a touchdown like they did on Saturday. So a lot of positives to take away. Yes, there's an asterisk next to all of it, as I mentioned with JG, but there's an asterisk next to all of it just because of the level of competition. But Tennessee didn't have any major players get hurt, nope. and they built their confidence. And yes, it's only the 3rd game of the season, but you have to give credit to this coaching staff and the players for not mailing it in after the first 2 weeks of the season, which were disastrous. That they could have given up or close to it at least, and kind of, oh well, this season isn't going to go well, and just kind of mailed it in. They can, and especially against UTC. It's an FCS opponent at 12 o'clock. Neyland isn't, the vintage Neyland atmosphere. It would have been easy to mail it in, but they came out, they played hard, and they executed. So a lot of positives.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There were a lot of positives, and that's what you hope for, what you should have when you're playing a team like UTC. But it was still something we didn't see against Georgia State. And Georgia State's not a good team. I mean, they just got. It's weird because they got blasted by was it Wyoming or someone over this weekend, 57-10. I mean, it was
Western Michigan.
Western Michigan, thank you. And it was the team that had like a brownish palette. I couldn't remember which team it was exactly. But I mean, it was a name your score type of game where I think it was 57-10 in the third quarter, and Western Michigan caught off the Dogs in the fourth. But you lost a team that did that. You lost a team that Georgia State almost lost their week 2 matchup against. I don't remember who they were playing, but it wasn't a good team. But then you also lost to BYU, a game you should have won. But then BYU goes out and beats USC, which I wonder how good USC actually is. I don't know if they really deserve to be ranked. I mean, it was just number 24, but I don't know if they really deserve to be ranked or not. But it's been a weird season so far, Ben. It makes me wonder. I mean, I don't think we know how good or bad this team actually is until they, play Florida, until they play the SEC schedule. I'm leaning a little more towards they're probably not good. They are probably kind of bad, but I don't know that I don't think they're nearly as bad as what we all kind of thought they might have been after the Georgia State game. And to kind of transition here a little bit, to touch on something actually you mentioned there about Garantano, to transition here a little bit to move away from the UTC game and to kind of start talking about Florida and Tennessee season moving forward. We all we heard what Garantano had to say after the game about getting confidence and feeling more like himself now. And you mentioned it there that it was important to get him that confidence back and to he was 7 of 8 for 142 yards, 3 scores, and his first pass was not very good. And then the rest of them, he completed all of them. And there were a couple that weren't fantastic throws, but they were still. A lot of them were a lot better than what he made against BYU. So I'm curious in your thoughts on it, Ben. How confident are you that JG is going to be able to keep this confidence and that this isn't just a one game thing? How confident are you in Garantano's ability to use this game as a springboard and to be able to, as you mentioned, be the type of quarterback Tennessee needs him to be to win some of these games? Because this Florida team is beatable. I've said all season long since the first preseason or for the first official AP poll and coaches poll came out, Florida to me is not a top 10 team. Not this year. I think they got the benefit of the doubt for the way they did last season. But as you've mentioned, I think definitely on here, and I know you've mentioned it, I'm pretty sure on Swain's show too, there was a certain amount of luck involved with Florida. I mean, every good team doesn't have luck. I mean, obviously the Tennessee, the 1998 team had a lot of luck. The 2016 team had some luck before it turned bad, but at the beginning of this season, for sure, you look at the Florida game and the Georgia game, there was definitely luck involved. And even in the Battle at Bristol, where you had those 5 fumbles, I mean, Tennessee didn't cause most of those fumbles. It was just Virginia Tech just fumbling it, just dropping it. Obviously, if you're a good team, you're going to get a lot of times you're going to get bounces that go your way. But I've said all along, I don't think Florida's a top 10 team. I don't even know if they're a top 15 team. I do think they're obviously good enough to be ranked. I don't think they're the number 9 team in the country. I think they're number 8 on the coaches poll. This is a beatable Florida team. But as you said, Garantano has to play closer to what he was playing last season, as far as not turning the ball over, maybe not taking as many chances. But if you're taking chances, take smarter chances than what he was taking against BYU, for example, or even some of the throws he was making against Georgia State. How confident are you that we've seen a change in Garantano for the rest of the season, that he's going to be able to take this newfound confidence and this kind of new, I guess, hopefully attitude that he has and this, this restored mentality, and carry that over on the road against Florida and carry it over the rest of the season? Because I have a decent amount of confidence in him. If there's one thing you cannot knock Garantano for, it's his toughness and it's his ability to kind of show resiliency and get through tough times. I don't doubt that one bit with him as far as, physically. Mentally, I had a little bit of a question mark about it just because of the way this season has started out. But I think he answered that question fairly well. I mean, obviously, it was against UTC, as we've said. Take everything with that game with a grain of salt. But I think he answered it fairly well against UTC. And I'm decently confident that he will be able to take this confidence and this mentality and what he's found from himself after the UTC game and carry it forward. But I'm curious how confident you are in JG's ability to kind of wipe the slate clean a little bit and move forward.
Not very confident, just because of how the first 2 weeks of the season went. It didn't go all that smoothly, and he looked, as I mentioned earlier, he looked like a quarterback that was just beaten down, who had just kind of had enough, unfortunately. And to a certain extent, I don't blame him. I mean, he's just had a rough career at Tennessee to this point with very minimal high points, and a lot of it is not his fault. I know a lot of people will disagree with that and want to put all the blame on JG, but a lot of his failures at Tennessee have been partly out of his hands. Coaching changes, different coordinators, all sorts of stuff. Terrible offensive line in front of him. A whole lot of just rough circumstances to fight through that would even make the best quarterbacks in the country not look as great as they do elsewhere. The Justin Herberts, Trevor Lawrences, Tua Tagovailoa, those guys are incredible talents, but I guarantee you, if you put them in the same situation that JG has had to deal with, they're not as successful at other places. I 1,000% believe that. And so I'm just not very confident based off of how the 2 weeks went, and that his quote-unquote confidence booster came against UTC. Because I think if he makes a mistake early, or if things don't go the offense's way early, I think he could just instantly revert back to kind of the mindset that he had during the first two games when he was struggling to get going. So it's not necessarily that I don't have faith in him, because I think he's good enough to get the job done. I agree with what you said about Florida. I don't think they are the number 9 team in the country. I think they are, a top 20, top 25 team. I think I would put them probably somewhere between 20 and 25, but they're not the number 9 team in the country. They barely beat a Miami team that is 1-2 on the season, and did not look good in that game other than their pass rush. And then they did not look all that great against Kentucky until Kyle Trask came in, and they're really banged up right now. So it is a winnable game. It's a noon game. I think that's in Tennessee's favor as well. Tennessee, for whatever reason, tends to play better on the road. Swain talked about that this morning. There's less distractions, less you have to worry about throughout the week. So it's a winnable game, and I think JG is capable of leading Tennessee to a win in the Swamp. But just the fact that he had a terrible 2-week stretch, fans were calling for his job. I'm not saying those fans are wrong, but fans were calling for his job, criticizing his play. Again, not blaming the fans for thinking that. He deserved to be criticized for his play. I think calling for his job was a little too much just based off of who is behind him. But he's had a rough start to the season. And UTC, while yes, a confidence booster, it's UTC. It would be different if that confidence booster came against BYU. Then there's some legitimacy to that. That last question you asked, I talked a lot about there being an asterisk next to that win, next to the confidence booster, next to how well Tennessee played because of the level of competition. That asterisk doesn't exist if JG's performance was as good against BYU or a team equivalent to BYU or Florida or South Carolina, or you get the point. So I think I'm worried that if things don't go his way early, he reverts back to that mindset and starts to begin thinking, oh boy, here we go again. So that is what worries me, and that's why I'm not very confident in him just completely being back to where he needs to be mentally.
I think that's fair. I mean, I think, as I've said ever since the BYU game, especially, and even a little bit after the Georgia State game, I don't fault fans or anybody, you, me, any other media members, fans, anybody, for having any sort of doubts about Garantano and his ability to do what he needs to do to help Tennessee win some games this year and maybe fight back to get to a bowl game. I can 100% see where you're coming from on that one, Ben, where if he gets into that same type of situation against the Gators, is he going to be able to bounce back? Or it doesn't have to be against the Gators. If it's against Georgia, if it's against Alabama or South Carolina here in the next month, or Mississippi State, is he going to be able to rebound from that and show the same type of mental toughness that he does when his same type of toughness he does physically, mentally? Because like I said, you cannot question his physical toughness. I mean, that kid has taken an absolute beating in his Tennessee career, and somehow is still walking and still, cognizant and still, is breathing and is still alive. I mean, he's taken just some absolute shots, especially, look at the Florida game last year, look at some of the other SEC games last year. I mean, he was just beaten, and he was knocked out of some games for sure, but he's still around and still starting and has still been a okay quarterback. But his mental toughness is the thing I wonder the most about this season, and I think it's a good point. I just personally think he showed a little bit more against UTC, and even earlier in his career, he wasn't the greatest that way when he was first at Tennessee. You remember obviously the Georgia Tech game in 2017. People point to that about him pouting and stuff. People still like to say he pouts and things. I haven't seen Garantano pout in a while, honestly.
No, and I want to butt in on this, so I apologize. I won't go on a long diatribe, but I think that is a terrible narrative because yes, he did pout on the sideline of the Georgia Tech game, but I would have pouted in the same situation if you know the context of the situation. And I think every 18-year-old, not every because that's a little extreme, but I would say 99% of 18 to 19-year-olds would pout in that situation. And for those who do not know the context of that game against Georgia Tech, Quentin Dormady started the game. Jarrett Garantano was told the week leading into the game, the day of the game, in the locker room before the game by Butch Jones multiple times that he was going to be the starting quarterback. And when Quentin Dormady began to pout, Butch catered to Quentin Dormady's needs because of Butch's relationship with Dormady's parents, Dormady's now wife's parents. He catered to Dormady's needs to not upset him, although he broke a trillion promises to JG. And Dormady kind of was not the best teammate towards JG. That's why JG was seen pouting on the sideline. And was it his best moment? No. I'm not saying he did the right thing, but I think with context, it makes a little more sense. I think that, again, 99% of us at that age would have done the same thing because at that age, we don't see the bigger picture. We just don't. And so I hate the narrative that he pouts all the time because, like you just said, I've never seen him pout other than in that moment. I truly have not. And I vehemently disagree, 1,000% disagree with anybody who says he pouts on the sideline. Is his body language good at times? No, it is not. But just because his body language is not good doesn't mean he is pouting. I think that is I think that's a word that you throw out there that you can't take back. That's like questioning somebody's toughness, calling them soft. You can't bring that back. Like, that's crossing the line. In my opinion, you better be daggum sure that they are soft. You better be daggum sure that they are pouting if you are going to call them out. Because in my opinion, that's like questioning somebody's manhood to a certain extent in my mind. So I'm with you, Nathaniel. I've never seen him pout other than that moment. And again, is his body language great? No, but it's not pouting. There's a difference between looking like you lack confidence and pouting. And so that's as you can tell. That is a comment that gets me really fired up because I don't think JG is a pouter. The dude is not mentally tough because we just had this conversation, but he is physically tough. He's tough as nails. That's what everybody says about him. He was not raised that way. He comes from a great family. He's a great kid. He's a great dude. He's not going to pout on the sideline. So I hate that narrative about JG because it's not true.
Yeah, I think you said it very well there. To keep on the quarterback thing here, there's going to be plenty of discussion about Garantano this week, and I'm sure we'll have more of it too in different podcasts and different things we'll do, and I'm sure you all will have plenty of it on the Swain event too, but we've talked enough, I think, about Garantano for now, and without kind of rehashing all the same arguments what we've been making and everyone's been making for the past week, it seems like, or even longer than that, really. Let's look at the Florida Gators, Ben, because, like I said, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time about UTC. That was a game that Tennessee should have been able to win like they did and everything, but over the weekend, Florida had a very interesting game against Kentucky where they were down by 11 points when their starting quarterback, Felipe Franks, just had a gruesome injury and he's going to be out the rest of the season. He's going to be out for at least for the next 6 months, according to head coach Dan Mullen, after dislocating his right ankle and just having, it was a bad injury, and I hated to see it happen. Never wish injury on anybody. Don't care who you play for. Care how much you hate the rival, hate the team, whatever. You don't wish injury, especially that kind of injury where it could affect his, not just this season, obviously, but affect his entire career down the line. I mean, that's an injury that, it could be affecting him 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the line, where his foot maybe never really totally heals from it. But they turned to Kyle Trask, who famously, when they brought him in, when Jim McElwain signed him, he was a guy who didn't even start for his high school football team in his senior year. I mean, he played at quarterback in both his junior and senior year, but he wasn't the starter for his high school team. Stuck around the program, didn't transfer out or anything like that, was brought on a scholarship, and they turned to him, and I thought he came in and I thought he provided a spark for the offense, because Florida's offense had been kind of struggling in the game. Frank's been, kind of a little sloppy with this play. Trask comes in, and his first drive, they go down and score. He pitches it to Michael P. Ryan on an option play right at the goal line, and PR runs it in for a touchdown. And then later on in the game, Trask goes down and scores the go-ahead touchdown when he runs it in from 4 yards out for the score, and gives Florida the 22-21 lead, and then Florida ends up winning 29-21. With that injury to Felipe Franks, Dan Mullen said that he kept Trask in the game and didn't rotate in and out Emory Jones, because he thought Trask was playing so well that he didn't want to kind of disrupt the flow and disrupt his rhythm. But he did say after the game on Saturday, and then again on Monday during his press conference, that he plans on playing both Emory Jones and Kyle Trask, kind of going for a dual quarterback system. But my question is simple. With Felipe Franks out, and with Florida going to a backup quarterback and maybe running a 2-quarterback system, do you feel more or less confident in Tennessee's ability to pull off the upset? Because personally, I feel less confident, because I think, to me, Franks was a guy who has a much higher ceiling. He's a bigger playmaker but threat than what you have with with Trask. I think it's Kyle Trask. But his floor was a lot lower, and he's a guy who's historically been a lot more careless with the football. And I know Trask hasn't played a whole lot. He's played against Kentucky, and he had an extended playing time against Missouri. Otherwise, if he's come in for a few series or here and there against 3 other teams, he completed 1 pass for 14 yards against Tennessee last year in that blowout victory. So we haven't seen a whole lot from Trask, but what we've seen, he hasn't been as careless with the football. I think even rotating Emory Jones in and out, as much as that could kind of be a weird wrinkle that might disrupt Florida's offense a little bit, Jones has flashed quite a bit of potential, and he's a good runner. I think that Felipe Franks being out for this game actually makes me feel less confident in Tennessee's ability to win.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the situation. If Florida rolls with a 2-quarterback system, a true 2-quarterback system, I'm in the boat of, I think that benefits Tennessee, because I think that switching the guys in and out will disrupt the flow of the offense, disrupt the rhythm that they could potentially be in if it was just Kyle Trask or if it was just Emory Jones. I thought that Florida looked completely better, or completely different and much better with Kyle Trask leading the way against Kentucky than they ever did with Felipe Franks. I thought Kyle Trask simply looked like a better quarterback. I thought he looked like a much better leader. I thought he showed more leadership in that quarter and a half of play than Felipe Franks had ever shown in his career, in his time at Florida. So if it's just Kyle Trask that plays, I'm less confident following Felipe Franks' injury, because I think Florida's offense is in a better position. I think Florida's team is in a better position with Kyle Trask leading the way, because I like I just mentioned, he showed more leadership in his playing time against Kentucky than I've ever seen out of Felipe Franks. And again, I thought he was more efficient as a passer and really trying to get the offense going in general. So I'm less confident if it's just Kyle Trask playing, but I'm more confident if it's a true 2-quarterback system, because I think that will really disrupt the rhythm and the flow of the offense. And I also think that it'll benefit Tennessee in the sense of it'll signal to Tennessee what is coming down the corner. Like if Emory Jones is in, then I think Tennessee's obviously going to expect the run. If Kyle Trask is in the game, they're obviously going to expect the pass. So that helps Tennessee. Again, I think it disrupts the rhythm of the offense. And then also, I think it doesn't do good or do well for the confidence of Kyle Trask and Emory Jones, because Kyle Trask hasn't started a football game at quarterback since his freshman year of high school, which I don't know how he is a redshirt junior at Florida, at the University of Florida, and he hasn't started a game since his freshman year of high school. That is weird to me. But then also, Emory Jones, he's a redshirt freshman, I believe, redshirt sophomore. He's a young guy who has not played a ton. If you're switching them in and out, running a true two-quarterback system, I mean, that doesn't do good for their confidence, in my opinion, and doesn't allow them to establish a rhythm. So, again, I am less confident if it's solely Kyle Trask running the show, and maybe even with Emory Jones running it, because he's a true dual-threat guy, and I think true dual-threat guys are going to be Tennessee's worst nightmare on defense this year. So I'm less confident if one guy's running the show. I'm more confident in Tennessee's chances to win if they roll out a true two-quarterback system.
I think that's fair too. I think that, like you said, they haven't done this two-quarterback system. And Mullen was asked by the Florida media on Monday if he feels like this could be a 2006 Leak Tebow situation. And I thought, boy, that's a question. I get what they're saying, because Mullen was obviously the offensive coordinator back then under Urban Meyer, and you had an older quarterback and then a younger quarterback. But Leak was a senior who had multiple years of starting experience at Florida that season in 2006, and Tebow was a true freshman who was, obviously Emory Jones was a highly rated guy, but Tebow was thought of as, the next coming as one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, and then obviously he lived up to it. Emory Jones doesn't have quite that much of a billing. He was thought of as a really good quarterback. Then you have Kyle Trask, who is a redshirt junior, who's the older quarterback like Leak, but as we both have said, he's never started. He's played in really 2 games where he had any kind of meaningful snaps in, and he played, well in them. But he's not Chris Leak material. I mean, Chris Leak wasn't, setting the world on fire at Florida, but he was a more than capable. To me, I think when I think of game manager who, does things right, makes the right decisions, Chris Leak is one of the ones that comes to mind. Obviously, he threw a little more interceptions than you would like from a true game manager type quarterback. But Chris Leak was good enough to help lead Florida, obviously, to a national title in 2006, and also help them to pretty successful seasons in Urban Meyer's early tenure at Florida. But I think it was a little bit of a loaded answer there to try to compare what you potentially have in 2019 to 2006 for Florida. But the point kind of stands if you're looking at just from a pure what the two quarterbacks bring from a skill set perspective, because Trask is more the passer and Emory Jones is more the runner. But Emory Jones also can pass it. He was 12 of 16 for 100-something yards and 2 touchdowns against Idaho last year. I know it was against Idaho, so, take that with a grain of salt for sure. But I do think that the quarterback situation, that's going to be the most interesting thing for me to monitor in the game is how does Florida's offense flow with that. And because we saw last year, Ben, with obviously, I think no one would argue that Jake Fromm and Jacob Eason. No, Jake Fromm. Yeah, Jake Fromm. I get those two confused for some reason. But Jake Fromm and Justin Fields are both more talented combined, especially than what Trask and Emory Jones have. But it wasn't really an issue when Georgia took on Tennessee, because Georgia just had so much more talent than Tennessee. But it did disrupt their offense a little bit. And you could see a few times last year, and especially when Tennessee played Georgia down in Athens, it seemed like Eason just wasn't as comfortable in that game as you would like to have seen him. And then when Fields came in, it kind of seemed like the offense ran a little bit better when Fields was in the game. Obviously, Tennessee, they fought in that game and fought really hard and had that a lot closer heading into the fourth quarter, or even early in the fourth quarter, than I thought that they would have it. But it disrupted the offense a little bit with Georgia, and I'll be very curious to see what it does to Florida's offense when Tennessee takes them on. Then kind of wrapping up the show here a little bit, we'll talk a lot about Florida as the week goes on, and our next podcast will be a lot more of a breakdown about Florida as well, and kind of what we're expecting to see in the game and everything like that. But just kind of based off what we've seen so far, I haven't had a chance to do a deep dive into Florida yet. I did watch pretty much most of the second half against Miami, and then most of the first half and all of the second half against Kentucky. So I've seen a decent amount of Florida right now, just from a kind of a cursory perspective of watching their games. Ben, what, in your opinion, is the one thing that makes you feel most confident about Tennessee's ability to go down to Gainesville and get upset? What's the one thing that you would say gives you the most hesitation? It doesn't have to be long, because we're kind of up against the length of the podcast here. But what are the one thing the one thing that makes you feel most confident about Tennessee's ability to get the upset? And what's the one thing that gives you the most pause about Tennessee getting the upset?
The one thing that makes me most confident, what I'm about to say is pretty telling of where Tennessee football is, and that's special teams. I think special teams is the area that Tennessee has the best chance to win, and it's an important aspect of the football game, but it's also telling of where Tennessee's football program is. But I do think, I'm not saying that Florida has bad specialists, but Tennessee has as good specialists as anybody in the country. I said that a moment ago, and I truly believe that. I think that Brent Smaglia is going to be automatic this weekend, although, of course, it'll be Tennessee luck that he goes in and he starts missing field goals when it matters most, and that's SEC play, first SEC game of the season against Florida. But I'm confident in him. I'm confident in Joe Doyle's or Paxton Brooks' ability to flip the game or to flip the field. I'm confident in Paxton Brooks' ability to not allow Florida a return, and with Florida's athletes, that is more important than you realize. I'm confident in Marquez Callaway to not muff a punt, although he has had some close calls over his career. He hasn't had a lot of muff punts or fumbles. So I'm confident in Callaway's ability, and I'm confident that Ty Chandler can take care of the football on kickoff returns and turn it in to a nice little gainage and allow Tennessee to start, closer to the end zone than the 25-yard line. So I'm confident in Tennessee's special teams that if you can pair good special teams play, if you can win that phase of the football game, that's a third of the football game, a more important phase of the football game than we realize. If Tennessee can win that and JG goes back to the JG of last year and takes care of the football, I think that is a great recipe for success. It sounds boring. It sounds super simplistic. It sounds like a coach's answer, but I think it really rings true this week, because what doesn't give me confidence is Tennessee's front seven and their ability to stop the run. Florida's weakness is along the offensive line. They're kind of rebuilding after they lost so many guys last year. And I don't think Tennessee has the guys that can take advantage of that. And when I say Tennessee's front seven, I group them all together. I have confidence in Daniel Batuli. I have confidence in Henry To'oTo'o. I have confidence in Darrell Taylor. Jeremy Pruitt talked today, Monday, during his press conference that, he's kind of banged up towards the end of fall camp. And each week he has gotten healthier and healthier, and each week he has played better and better. So I'm confident in those three guys, but those are 3 out of 10 to 14 guys that will be playing in the front seven. And I do not have confidence in Tennessee's defensive line more so than the linebackers that they can get the job done. And I mentioned it today on the show. If Daniel Batuli or Henry To'oTo'o have to miss some time, I'm not confident in the guys that are coming in after those guys. And it's more so Shannon Reed, Jeremy Banks, and my mind just went blank. Shannon Reed, Jeremy Banks, those two I definitely don't have confidence in against Florida. Jeremy Banks looked good against UTC, but it's UTC.
Yeah.
And then I'm kind of 50-50 on Will Ignont. He has the ability to make plays, but he gets too emotional at times, and he'll line up correctly. So I'm most confident in Tennessee's ability to win the special teams phase of the game. I'm least confident in Tennessee's ability to stop the run. And as we know about the Florida game, the team that rushes for the most yards tends to win the game more often than not. And then one more quick one that I'll add in is Florida's corners and Florida's secondary in general. Their depth is very shaky right now. If Tennessee's offensive line can continue to improve like they have each week this season and give JG time to push the ball downfield, and assuming JG has a good game, I think that's an area where Tennessee can really take advantage of with Marquez Callaway, with Josh Palmer, with Juwan Jennings, maybe even Dominic Wood-Anderson. That's another area that I am confident Tennessee can win that area of the football game.
Yeah, I think for me, what I'm most confident in, or what gives me the most hope for Tennessee to win this game, is the fact that Tennessee seems to play, specifically Jarrett Garantano, seems to play better on the road than he does at home. And I'm actually in the process of, as we're doing this podcast, kind of looking at the stats and stuff, and I was about to tweet out some stats of it. But looking at his home-road splits just from 2018, I'm including what he did in 2017, but looking at just his home-road splits, in 2018. In his road games, I mean, he had some tough road games. He had, obviously, against Georgia. That's kind of the biggest one. But, obviously, tough home games, too, against Florida and Alabama. And he didn't actually make it through the entire game for both of those, actually. He was knocked out of both those games early. But from his home road splits in 2018, just 2018 alone, he was 60% completion percentage at home, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks, 918 yards. On the road, 61.2 completion percentage, which is a little over a percent better than his home. 817 yards, which was actually less yardage, but 7 touchdowns and an interception. So more touchdowns, even less interceptions on more attempts on the road than at home. And then you go look at his 2017 numbers as well, and he didn't play actually as much on the road in 2017 as he did at home, but a 59% completion percentage, 711 yards, 4 touchdowns and a pick at home, 69.2% completion percentage, so a lot better completion percentage, 286 passing, no touchdowns and 1 interception on the road. But, I mean, for his entire career, I mean, that's a lot better road performance at home, and this will be his first road game of the season for this year. And it'll be the first time he's played in the swamp, so I'll be very curious to see how he does. But I think, to me, what gives me most confidence is that Tennessee, I think they need to get away a little bit from Neyland Stadium, from the fans and stuff. And I'm not trying to blame fans for anything like that. I just think it would be good for this team mentally and everything to get away a little bit and to go down there. And I think they'll be fine because it's a noon kickoff. I don't think the swamp's gonna be rocking. You're looking at what happened last year with Auburn. That stadium where Auburn plays gets very loud when it's in the right environment. And a noon kickoff last year, especially with Auburn having a lot of the stuff they're having in their locker room, was not the ideal environment for the Tigers. Obviously, you're not having that with Florida, but I think fans, it's a top 10 team, so they should still get there. But I don't know, how loud is a noon kickoff going to be. You'd think back to the 2014 season when Tennessee hosted Florida for the noon kickoff in Neyland. I was there. I mean, I was a student at the time, so I was there, and it was the first ever Checker Neyland game. It was loud, but it wasn't as loud as it could have been. It was kind of a muted. I think maybe part of it was fans were just kind of nervous about it too, because Tennessee had a lead, and it was not a very big lead, and they were playing very conservative, but it was not as loud as it was when you had 2016, and I think both games were sellouts. I don't know if the 2014 game actually officially was a sellout or not, but it was over 100,000 for sure. You're not going to have too much of a volume difference between a couple thousand people usually, but that was a more muted crowd. Even though it was a big one, it was still more muted than what I remember from games in 2015 and 2016, which were night games against think back to Oklahoma game especially in 2015. But that's my kind of base thing. Is it's a little bit more of an intangible, not necessarily a matchup perspective. It's more of the fact that I think Tennessee needs to get on the road. I think they might play better on the road. Maybe some of the older guys. I'm not sure about the young guys, but definitely some of those older guys on offense I think will play well on the road. And then you have the fact that I don't think it's a great environment, a very conducive environment for Florida to have come out and be rocking. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. But I think I agree with you, Ben. I think the biggest thing I look at as far as why I would not pick Tennessee to pull the upset is, for one, I think Florida's just a better team than Tennessee is overall. But you also look at the line of scrimmage, and I think Florida has a chance to just dominate on both sides of the ball in the line of scrimmage. Maybe not quite as much when they're on offense, because I don't know how great Florida's offensive line really is. But Tennessee's defensive line's not very good, in my opinion. I mean, they haven't shown that they're very good right now, and maybe the front seven as a whole, maybe you can get some linebackers to get some penetration with Darrell Taylor or Gover's Crouch off the edge, or maybe DeAndre Johnson has a decent game, or Kevon Bennett does, something like that. But I just don't think Tennessee's front seven is going to match up super well against the offensive line of Florida. And then on the other side, I know Tennessee's offensive line's gotten better, and like we said earlier, it seems like they've found a good solid 6 or 7 guys they are going to trust moving forward for the season right now on the offensive line, with the starting 5 you had on Saturday with Wanya Morris, Trey Smith, Brandon Kennedy, Kayvon Calvert, and Darnell Wright. But then you also have Jameer Johnson, who's been banged up, but I think they absolutely trust him to play. And you can throw in Marcus Tatum or Ryan Johnson in there, who I think they also, they feel fine putting into the game if they have to. But I still don't know. It's gotten better, but they haven't played. Tennessee's yet to play a good front seven. I don't think they've played an NFL caliber player at least on the defensive line in the first 3 games of the season. Florida has a lot of talent on that front 7. I mean, Zuniga is there. Dan Mullen said he's kind of questionable or whatever. He's going to play on Saturday. I would be stunned if Zuniga didn't play on Saturday against Tennessee. I would be pretty surprised. And Zuniga is really, really good. He's just another one of those good edge rushers that Florida just seems to have every single season. But I don't have a lot of confidence in Tennessee winning the line of scrimmage battle on either side of the ball, and I don't think you're going to be able to beat Florida without winning at least one of the line of scrimmage battles. But Ben, you and I will have a lot of stuff to say and talk about and cover with Florida and Tennessee about to play on over the weekend. We'll have all kinds of content on RockyTopInsider.com in podcast form and video form and everything that you could want to cover for the game. We'll have all kinds of stuff for you. I've already got a couple pieces out on the site about Florida, mentioning on Sunday about Felipe Franks being out for the season and Tennessee likely to face Kyle Trask, but then also on Monday following up from what Dan Mullen said about playing both Trask and Emory Jones and talking about what that could mean for Tennessee, and they're going to be likely preparing for a dual quarterback system, or maybe some gamesmanship. Maybe Dan Mullen is just saying that so Tennessee prepares for both and he only plays one. We'll see, but I have a feeling you will see both on the field. But we'll have all kinds of coverage for you, not just from Tennessee's side of things, but from Florida's side of things as well, to keep you all well informed heading into what we think is a winnable game, but we'll see if Tennessee pulls it off. But thank you all for listening to this episode of the podcast. We appreciate it. You can subscribe to us at Apple Podcasts. If you have a Android phone, you can download us or get the podcast that way in whatever podcasting app you use that way. RockyTopInsider.com and click on the podcast tab. You can find us there. And also YouTube is the newest way to interact with us, and we appreciate all of you who leave comments and everything on the podcast on YouTube as well. Just search Rocky Top Insider on YouTube, and you can subscribe to us there. And we have all kinds of stuff coming for you: practice videos, press conferences, player media availability, and hopefully some live streams and maybe some other stuff moving forward as well. But signing off for Ben McKee, I'm Nathaniel Rutherford. Thank you all so much. This has been another episode of the RTI Podcast.